A lot of people are under the misimpression that the Islamic dilemma is some like clever modern argument. What if I told you we have new evidence of a Syriac Christian in the 700s making this exact same argument? We've uncovered a manuscript where George of Beltane lays out a response to Islam. He basically invented the Islamic dilemma before it ever had a name. The Islamic dilemma, it's actually really simple. The Quran repeatedly points Muslims back to the scriptures that came before it. But here's the problem. Those previous scriptures very obviously flat out contradict the Quran. Horn number one. If the scriptures before Muhammad were reliable, then Islam collapses because those same scriptures contradict Islamic teaching. Horn number two. If those scriptures were unreliable, the Quran undercuts itself because it tells Muslims in Surah 1094 to consult the Jews and the Christians. That makes absolutely zero sense if the scriptures were already unreliable. So either way, the Quran is stuck on the horns of a dilemma. George of Beltane, writing just a century after Muhammad, was already seeing this exact tension. His commentary on the Gospel of Matthew, George opens with a brilliant rhetorical move. He says the way to answer the charge of corruption is to ask four questions. When, who, why, and what. First, George presses the when question of timing. If the gospel was corrupted before Muhammad, then, he points out, why would Surah 1094 instruct Muhammad to ask the Jews and Christians? George knew that the Quran itself assumes the reliability of earlier scriptures. But if the corruption supposedly happened after Muhammad, George says that's actually impossible. After his coming, there is no proof whatsoever of a synod of all nations during which they determined which words they would omit and which words they would add. This is because the gospel is the same to all of them. Next, he pushes the what and why question of motive. Why would Christians falsify their own scriptures? George points out it's not for the money, since the gospel still commands poverty. Then, in addressing the who question, George brilliantly appeals to the Quran's own teaching. It couldn't have been them, since the Quran itself calls them divinely chosen and faithful. Here's the crucial point. Once you grant the gospel's reliability, the Islamic dilemma writes itself. If the gospels are reliable, Islam is false because the Quran contradicts the gospels. If the gospels are unreliable, Islam is false because the Quran itself implies that the gospels are reliable in Surah 1094. George nailed it 1200 years ago. The Islamic dilemma isn't some like clever modern trick. Christians in the 700s already saw it, already argued it, and already used it to defend the gospel.